One of the things that I always tried to understand is, and sometimes I would directly ask the caregivers, is what's the reason you're a caregiver? And I would try to determine how strong and how deep that reason is. And that's an important thing that I ask caregivers to think about. Why are you a caregiver? And what's the reason you do it? And it's important to ask that question to yourself because when the going gets tough, you better have a good answer.
Welcome to another episode of Mama Mabel's Caregivers podcast, where we bring truth, compassion, and expert insight to the forefront of the caregiving journey. Today's episode is titled How a Geriatrician Evaluates Patients and Caregivers, What Every Family Should Know. If you're caring for an aging loved one or simply preparing for that journey, understanding how medical professionals approach elder care can be a game changer. What are they looking for? How do they assess not just the patient, but the caregiver? And how can families prepare for the long term emotional, physical, and medical needs of aging with dignity? Our guest today brings decades of clinical wisdom, innovation, and heart to these questions. Dr. Wong has dedicated his professional life to the care of older adults. He is the founder of the Geriatric service at Kaiser Permanente in Hawaii. He went on to lead changes in the Kaiser Permanente healthcare system to improve care of seniors. Dr. Wong designed Senior Segmentation, a strategy that is being implemented throughout Kaiser Permanente's 1 million older adult members. In 2024, Dr. Wong initiated drwarrenwong.com. Dr. Wong is currently writing a book for caregivers of frail older adults entitled The Gold Book, Getting Older with Love and Dignity. Dr. Wong is a clinical professor in geriatric medicine, John A. Burns School of Medicine at the University of Hawaii. Well, hello, Dr. Warren Wong. How are you?
Hi, Talisa. I'm glad to be here and I'm doing great. Thanks so much.
I'm so happy to have you as a guest on Mama Mabel's Caregivers podcast on today. Listen, podcast family, you know what I'm about to say. And again, this is going to be a great episode, a great conversation. We have Dr. Warren Wong from Hawaii that's here. He is a geriatrician and he's here to talk to us about this great topic on today, how a geriatrician evaluates patients and caregivers, and it's what every family should know. So this will be a dynamic conversation. I ask that you share this with your loved ones or anyone you feel that would benefit from today's episode. So with that, let's get straight into it. So Dr. Wong, please tell me about yourself and how you got started and why you decided to become a geriatrician.
So, I started a long time ago when I went to medical school. I really wanted to serve my own community. I'm a Chinese American, and I did end up working in Chinatown in San Francisco for a long time. I was actually originally from the Bay Area. But life moves on, and I moved on to a different stage. I ended up living in Hawaii, and I met my wife, and of course, that meant that I would never return back there. And I continued my career in Hawaii. But there was a very important thing I learned when I was in San Francisco. Is very early in my career, I started working at an organization called Unlock in San Francisco Chinatown. It just took care of frail older people. And it has a completely different model. These frail older people, a lot of them would have been frail enough to live in a nursing home, but we kept them living independently and in the community. And there was a formula for that. And the formula was to bring them into the day center where the physician and the nurse practitioners and the activities coordinators were there, kept them very busy with a schedule every day. And then at the end of the day, they would return home. And it was kind of a win-win. It was great for our participants. It was very cost effective and families loved it. And that program now is across the United States as what's called the PACE program, PACE. It's not in every state, but it's in many cities across the country, and it is a Medicare benefit. That kind of inspired me. When I moved to Hawaii, I went back to being a primary care doctor for a while, but it always stayed in my mind that there's a better way to take care of older people than the way we do now. And that's why I decided to go into geriatrics and try and change the world, at least for the way we take care of older people.
That's actually a great resource as well. I haven't heard of that before. It's called PACE, PAC.
Yeah, it's called the Program for All Inclusive Care for the Elderly. It is a Medicare benefit, but there has to be a program near where you live, and then you need to qualify for the program.
So, podcast family, as Dr. Wong just stated, there is a program called PACE, PACE. Take out some time and Google that to see if it's available in your area. And then also, as Dr. Wong just stated, make sure you look into it and see if you're a candidate for it or your loved one can be a candidate for it if needed. So, geriatrics. You went back to Hawaii and you decided you really wanted to focus on that. So, how
Right.
long have you been doing that for?
A long time. It was over 30 years. I took various breaks and, I spent a lot of years doing direct care, but I also got into program design, redesigning things. And actually now I'm moving on to different things. We're trying to rethink the way we provide care for older people in Hawaii because Hawaii has a very large number of older people. Our average life expectancy in Hawaii is longer than any other state. So we have quite a few older people here, and we need to do a better job than just having people end up in nursing homes. So,
I agree with that. What are some of the best practices that differs under the care of a geriatrician?
well, I think that some of the best practices are just starting to emerge. There's a more and more emphasis on home and community based care. So, I was just writing a blog not that long ago, and one of the things I don't really like is call 911 whenever there's a problem. In our clinic, what we said is, if there's a problem, call us. And it was seldom something that required an ambulance right away, but when they called us, we actually knew the patient, we knew the circumstances, and we would say, these are the alternatives, and we would always deliver. In other words, we'd say, you can go to the emergency room. It does sound like it's serious enough to go to the emergency room, but we can also visit you at home. And depending on how serious the problem was, we would tell them when we would visit them. If the problem seemed like it could wait, we'd say we can visit within the next day. If the problem sounded like it couldn't wait, we would say we can be there this afternoon. And what we always did to Lisa's, we over delivered. In other words, if we said we were going to do something, we did it always better than that. If we said that we'd be there within a day, guaranteed would be there within a day. We said there would be there within 4 hours. A lot of times we'd be there within 3 hours. And then we would look at the situation and evaluate it at home and say, this is what's going on. How would you like to manage the situation? And so it wasn't always automatically just say, go to 911, call 911 and call the ambulance. Because the reality is, if you call 911 and your parent is frail and elderly, unless it's just a simple fall, there's a high likelihood that the person you're caring for is going to be brought to the emergency room. And the statistics are that once you go to the emergency room and you're in your 80s, the likelihood is that you're going to be hospitalized. And there's a nationwide statistic is that once a person is in their 80s and is hospitalized, there's almost a 50-50 chance they're not going home right away. They're going to go to a nursing home, at least short term. And so a lot of times older people say, I don't want to go to the ER. And they may not know exactly why, but the way the healthcare system is designed now, it's not always an outcome they would like.
It's pretty deep. It really is. You said like several things that I did not know existed. So, for an example, you and your team would make house calls to your
Hmm.
patients, right? And
Yeah.
they were able to call you, and you were able to assess what was happening and actually go and visit them versus having the patients go to the hospital. I don't think I've ever really heard of that before.
Well, I'll tell you why you've never heard of it, Talisa. It hardly exists. Across the whole country, it hardly exists, but it's a budding movement now. More and more, there's this emphasis that healthcare should not just be in the hospital, it should be in the community as well. And a lot of the programs that we have in here in Hawaii are leading edge. But if you just do a Google search on home and community based healthcare and home based physicians, we are just at the very beginning of that. And my hope and belief is that it's going to get much bigger in the decades ahead.
I hope so as well. There's definitely a need for it. And podcast family, if you can, please research what Dr. Wong has just stated, because there's a chance that you may have these resources available to you. In addition to making house calls, what are some other areas within the community that you would use to help with the patients?
So I think what geriatricians really are good is healthcare is so siloed now. In other words, there are many social care programs that exist in the community, and then there's many healthcare programs that exist, but it's like the two don't communicate and don't coordinate. And my the question I always ask is, do you know anybody by name? Do you know somebody you could just call or email and they'll get back to you right away? It's not that you know a program, it's that you actually know a person on the other side of the fence who can actually coordinate with you. And that really does not exist as a general paradigm of the way things are done in the United States. So it's interesting because when we see people who are hospitalized over and over again among frail older people, it's the social determinants that really make a big difference. Like when I made home visits, I could tell when the social determinants were not favorable. And I could tell when the social determinants were favorable. Like, let's say, Talisa, I made a visit to your home. I know you'd be totally ready. You'd have everything lined up. You'd know exactly what's going on. And I would say, I don't need to worry about this patient because Talisa is really taking care of this person. But on other times, I would go to homes and I'd knock on the door and I could hear somebody inside. And they wouldn't even answer the door. And I said, this patient's caregiving situation is a problem. And the social determinants play a huge role here in terms of whether this person is likely to be hospitalized or not. And I think healthcare systems are really starting to realize that it's not just about picking the right medicine. It's about addressing these social determinants. Can the caregivers actually take care of the patients? What are the specific situations? And a lot of your listeners are listening to you for hints. And I think the truth is that all you can provide is hints and a perspective because every person's situation is different. Not everybody is Talisa in terms of Talisa's skills and way of thinking and passions. Everybody has a different story. Other people have parents that were not like your mom. Other people have different relationships, and you have to understand all those things and say, what is the team that's involved? And that's what I actually did as a geriatrician. Is you mentioned, you might investigate that, and you're talking to the caregivers, but it makes a big point. The you is not just the patient; it's the you and the caregiver. You're a team, and if it's a strong team, the results are more likely to be good. But if you're a weak team, what can I do to help?
Yes, very well said. And to your point, everyone's situation is different. And having resources available for people out there and knowing what your options are and just trying your best to get in front of the ball in terms of coming up with a game plan. As you just stated, even looking at the social factors I believe that all of these things can help. That's actually great information that you just shared. In terms of being a caregiver, what's some of the advice that you give to the potential caregivers when they come to see you?
Yeah. So when I would geriatrics is in some ways similar to pediatrics. For a child, it's important to know who's taking care of the child. For a geriatrician, it's important to know who's taking care of the older person, especially if they've become dependent and needing assistance. And one of the things that I always tried to understand is, and sometimes I would directly ask the caregivers, is what's the reason you're a caregiver? And I would try to determine how strong and how deep that reason is. And that's an important thing that I ask caregivers to think about. Why are you a caregiver? And what's the reason you do it? And it's important to ask that question to yourself, because when the going gets tough, you better have a good answer. Does that make sense?
Definitely, because what you just stated is what the caregiver can have to lean on in times of difficulty to help remind them of the reason why they decided to take this journey with their loved one as the caregiver.
If the reason's not really strong, it starts to creep in. Why the heck am I even doing this?
Mhm. Have you been able to help the potential caregivers when you've had that conversation?
Yes. So I explore the question with them and try to get a sense of, have they even thought about that question? And sometimes it's very intuitive. Some people will just say right away, I love my mom so much. And you can feel it right away that it's very strong. Other times, when it's kind of, well, I'm retired and there's no one else that can do it. I point out that that's not a really, really strong reason. And I ask, dig a little bit deeper and look for the reasons. And, people, when they hesitate and when they think about it, they know when they have a strong reason and they know when their reason is not that strong. And people should realize what how strong their reason is and think about what they're taking on.
I agree with that because just speaking from experience, being a caregiver can be a lot and it definitely has its challenges, but leaning on the reason of why could actually help bring you strength during the time of weakness. For an example, for me, when my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer, and this was just out of nowhere because there was never a diagnosis of stage 1, 2, or 3, I automatically knew I wanted my mother to move down south with me. I said, I'll retire you out, mom. I said, come on, let's go. She's like, you'll do it? I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. I took care of her because my reason was simple. Not only did I love her, but if the shoe was on the other foot, my mother was the type of person that would have been there for me without even second guessing, without questioning anything. My mother would have been there for me because she always was. And it was just because of how much she loved me. I loved her just as much, and I decided to be there for her. Even when I look back on it, if I had it to do all over again, I would do it. And as I took care of her, I took care of her with a smile on my face because I genuinely loved her. And everything I did came from my heart. So that's a very good point, doctor, that you brought up because you may need to lean on that when times gets rough.
Sometimes the reasons are much more practical. It might be about finances, like, well, what my mom can't afford a nursing home, and she's gonna use up all her money to be in a nursing home, and the practical reason she wanted to give the house to us, and if we're going to save up. I mean, that's a very practical reason, but I've seen it over and over again. And it is a reason that when people admit it and acknowledge it, it kind of sticks in their mind that, yeah, there's a practical reason I'm doing this too. And even the practical reasons help.
That's an excellent point, doctor. And it makes sense. Thinking about being a geriatrician and how you evaluate patients, What is some advice that you can share with families for them to be on the lookout for?
Yeah, so it gets back to your original question about some hints I have for caregivers. And the first question I have is, what is the motivation for a caregiver to be a caregiver? And the second question is, do you have the skills? Do you have the ability for the task that's in front of you? And the tasks can be a multiple different number of tasks. For you, Talisa, it might have been relatively medically complex, with your mom with breast cancer and needing a lot of relatively significant medical interventions. Other people, so you need to get a sense of what is it that my loved one or the person I'm taking care for really needs help with. And it could be simple things like just organizing, or it could be daily tasks like cooking and bringing a person to the physician. But it could also be personal care, you know, giving a person a shower, bathing, helping a person eat. And then there's the other dimensions. It could be because the person has dementia and is confused, and you need to guide them in that way. And what if they have behavioral problems? Well, what are the needs? How much time do I have? And what are the skills that I have? And what am I able to do? And what am I not able to do? And it's important to be realistic about that. I'll tell you a little story. I made a home visit once, and this husband was very dedicated to his wife, really wanted her to stay at home, but she had become bedbound, and he really did not have the strength to take care of her. And she would lay in bed, and sure enough, after a little bit of time, she got a bed sore. And once a bed sore starts, it can get worse and worse quickly. And I have to tell you, in that case, I ended up calling Adult Protective Services because he just did not have the capacity to take care of her. Even though there was no doubt in the world for me that he loved her, but he was doing something that he just was not capable of doing, taking care of her under those circumstances. So I think people who take care of people, they really need to understand what is it that needs to be done, and do I have the skills? And if it's things that are behavioral issues, you really have to think about your own ability to manage dementia. When it comes to the special situation of people with dementia, do you have the skills to work with a person with dementia? And you can develop some of those skills, but you have to take an honest look at yourself and say, am I going to go away from this caregiving experience as a gold experience, one in which you learned and grew? Or are you going to go away from your experience with post-traumatic stress because you've taken on much more than you really could reasonably manage? And Talisa, someone like you, has done a great job, but I've come across a fair number of caregivers who still look back and say that it was a very difficult time in their life, and nobody wants that. Nobody wants it to be beyond the abilities of a caregiver. It's not good for the patient, and it's not good for the caregiver.
Would you recommend in that type of scenario they build the community to help them with that?
Definitely, definitely. And it's really important sometimes, it's a very common refrain, nobody else will do it. And sometimes when you dig it into that, there's a certain amount of nobody else will do it as well as I can do it, or nobody else will do it exactly the way I do it. But you have to look at the pros and cons of that, because I think so long as anybody's willing to help, everybody brings their own strengths into it, and you, it's important not to put your expectations on that, but to say what actual strengths can this person bring to it, even if it's something like my brother never does anything, but he's willing to take her out to dinner once in a while. Well, that is some degree of help. And it's to kind of develop a community, and also to look at why does no community exist. And because there's always a community. Sometimes when people say there's no one else that can do it, I really delve into the question of, well, if you were not here, what would happen? And then they start coming up with, well, this is oh no, that could happen, this would happen. And then it becomes clear that actually there are some things out there that can support the care. So I really, there are situations in which I can see that a caregiver is really doing as well as they can and still struggling a little bit. And that's in that situation, it's my role to support them and to give them strength and advice and suggestions. But there have been some times when I just told caregivers, this is not realistic. It just won't work. And it's not good for the patient. It's not helping you. It's just not going to work. And those situations are usually pretty stark. I have been in that situation sometimes.
How did that go when you've had to have those difficult conversations? What were the reactions of the patients or the caregivers of the patient?
Most of the time, it went pretty well. You know, I think as a physician, you're always trying to gauge how what a person can hear and what a person can't hear. So most of the time, actually, I would say in the majority of the time, it went pretty well. And some people would even be relieved to say, you know, the doctors pointed out that this is not realistic. Every once in a while, there would be some defensiveness, but I actually did not find that to be that common if people were really willing to dig deep down and say, you know, there's some truth to this.
So you would say that for the most part, when you've had those difficult conversations, that the people were very receptive to what you had to say.
Yeah, and partly it is about how much trust there is in the relationship between the physician, the caregiver, and the patient. And sometimes that happens very quickly. Sometimes it takes a long time to develop that trust. You know, in desperate situations, of course, you just need to step in and say, this is not working. So,
Right. That's awesome that you've been able to take that stance and to help patients when their loved ones weren't really capable of being able to do so. All right, podcast family, I do have some exciting news to share with you all. Dr. Wong has been great, sharing all of this information with us on today, and I really appreciate him for that. He also has a website that I want to make you aware of. His website is drwarrenwong.com. And this information will also be in the description of this episode. So, Dr. Wong, please tell us more about your website.
well, my website it includes a lot of blogs that the goal is actually to come up with a book, and the the website helps keep me moving forward and getting the work done. And it provides some of the draft chapters of the book that I'm writing. And one of the chapters did relate to who is the caregiver and what is the role that is ahead. So that's one specific topic. Right now, I'm focusing on topics related to dementia and specific. Just the last couple of days, I've been writing about romance and new relationships in the context of dementia and how they are actually relatively common. So the website, it's continues to be a work in progress, but underneath it all is my goal. I would say that my passion, even after being at this for a long time, is to improve care for older people and the continued concept that the way we do things is really not what frail older people want, and it's not supportive of caregivers, and ultimately the healthcare system is not well designed for that. And those remain my passions. I always say that there's no one more important in the life of a frail older person than the caregiver, daily life. And the caregiver is the most important member of the team. And my hope is to give caregivers some insight and some hints about how to take care of people as they become more and more dependent.
That's great. And I know you shared with me that you're writing a book. So, podcast family, Dr. Wong is in the process of writing his book. When his book comes out, it'll be important that you follow him, follow his website so that you know when it's out. It'll be a great read, especially with the deep dive that Dr. Wong is taking as it pertains to the various aspects of caregiving and even various diagnoses such as dementia. So that'll be great.
Even if you don't remember my name, the book is going to be about gold, GOLD, getting older with love and dignity. And that's we're all, this is an aging country. We need to learn how to help people get older with love and dignity. And that's a little bit lacking right now in the way we have healthcare. So just think gold.
Okay, that's awesome. I wholeheartedly agree with you, especially with everything that's happening right now in our world. What you're doing is great. It'll really help a lot of people. You did mention that you were writing about the past few days about relationships with dementia and how common that is. Can you just share just a little bit about that? It was just intriguing for me.
It's intriguing because, of course, there are some people with dementia who live all alone, very mild stages, and then people with dementia who live with spouses and family. And in spite of that, it can get kind of lonely because there's an established relationship that has been created before the person has dementia, and that relationship now is injured or is being challenged, and the person needs a relationship that can accept the person for who he or she is right now. And that it comes out that, sometimes just a person that is just friendly becomes a new relationship because of the stresses of the whole situation.
I tell you what, I'm definitely interested in reading your book and I'll be purchasing it when it comes out. So I'll be following along. And Dr. Wong, when your book becomes available, please reach out to me and I will make the announcement to my podcast family to let them know that that is
Great.
out. And podcast family, when I announce it, you'll be able to purchase it. I look forward to that. I really do.
Hey, Talisa, can I give one very practical hint? I know our little talk is getting to an end, but I want to give one very practical hint to your caregivers.
Yes, please.
People should just do an internet search for caregiver duties lists. And there's a lot of those lists out there, and it just spells out exactly what needs to be done. And it's good to fill it out because people have thought about it and they get a sense of you go into it and you think one thing needs to be done, and then you realize that, oh, I didn't think about this, I didn't think about that, and then put the whole list together and then check off the one things that you think you can do, and then think about, if I can't do this, who can do this. So
That's actually podcast family. What Dr. Wong has said is it's just amazing because it also gets you to thinking about who else can come and step in and who else is able to help you out. You may need to take a nap. You may be tired. So who can come over and maybe cook a meal or go grocery shopping or whatever the case may be. That's actually great information. Thank you for that. All right. Well, Dr. Wong, is there anything else you would like to share?
my third hint is to have a line in the sand. Just say, this is my limit. And if you have a line in the sand, that helps you preserve your own sanity.
I agree with that. Boundaries. Would you say that's boundaries?
Yeah, and at least that you know that you have a boundary. And sometimes when you reach that boundary, you realize, well, I can take this, but I'm going to create another land. There needs to be some awareness of, this is not forever. This is not an impossible task.
Okay. And I like the way you stated that. This isn't forever and this isn't an impossible task. Keep that in mind, podcast family, as you are providing care for your loved ones. Dr. Wong just stated is great information and like an affirmation to go by as you are out here providing care for your loved one. Thank you very much for that. Dr. Warren Wong, thank you so much again for coming on to Mama Mabel's Caregivers podcast and sharing all of this great information with the podcast family on today. I sincerely appreciate it.
And Talisa, I'll thank you not only from me, but from all your listeners for the support you provide them. Lisa. It's very important.
Thank you. I received that. Thank you very much.